Hello everyone, welcome into Above My Pay Grade. My name is Eric, channeling my low-tech environment here. I'm on the road again. So printed out a story that I found interesting. On the plane here, I'm reading a book called The Death of Money, or When Money Dies. Yeah, When Money Dies. And it's about Weimar. Really fascinating because it gets into the cultural dynamic of Weimar and what people were thinking at the time and how people were speculating specifically, which the scary part is seems awfully similar to today. But I saw this story on Zero Hedge the other day that I thought I'd share with you guys. It's titled, America's Insolvency is Mandatory. Eye-catching title, is it not? Now, the reason it says it's mandatory, like I've said in this channel before, is if you have debt to GDP like we have today, it requires, just like if you have massive credit card debt, it requires a massive influx of income or cutting expenses to basically zero. And unfortunately, we can't. So that's what they kind of get into here, and I want to kind of read from this story. So the deficit this year is supposed to be about 1.3 trillion. I think that's going to go up because we have things like the National Defense Authorization Act. They asked for 800 billion. They just got another 50 billion, right? Social Security, that goes up with inflation. Medicare goes up with inflation, yada, yada, yada. So everything's getting more expensive. And here's the kicker. What is happening to tax receipts? Because in 2021, the taxpayers spent about $600 billion in capital gains taxes. That went to the federal government. And yet we still had a deficit. Is anybody making capital gains? Maybe on investment property, but not stocks or crypto. Definitely not this year. So that is zero on the balance sheet for the government. And yet they still had a deficit, fairly large one last year. Kind of interesting. Okay, so it says here, the long-term picture is even gloomier, with the deficit expected to double to 2 trillion by 2030. So adding a trillion every year. I think that's going to grow faster because the Congressional Budget Office always underestimates what the forecast is going to be, and their forecast is fairly gloomy because we have all these baby boomers retiring. We're going to collect on Social Security, and they were one of the biggest generations in America, if not the biggest. So we have, I believe I heard 10,000 baby boomers a day retiring. And at the same time, you've heard of this like quiet quitting generation, the people who are like giving up and don't care. Those are the people who are supposed to pay into Social Security tax. Yeah. So by 2052, they said the debt will soar to 185% of the country's economic output. I think we're going to de-dollarize by the time 2052 rolls around. That's just my 2 cents. Reason being is we're stuck between this rock and a hard place. The rock being inflation, right? And the hard place being people's jobs getting destroyed by raising interest rates. So as we raise interest rates, that causes the government to pay more on its debt. And then the government's going to whisper in Jerome Powell's ear and say, you better knock it off because we can't afford this. It's about 28% of that 31 trillion is going to get refinanced next year at these insanely high rates. So something to keep in mind. And I don't care what you say, Federal Reserve is not independent. They get elected and voted in. So you tell me if they're independent. So like I said, last year, or the government's 2022 $1.3 trillion deficit came at a time of near record tax intake. So it was, as percent of GDP, we took in about 19.8% of GDP, which is the second highest haul by Uncle Sam since 1944. And yet we still had a deficit of 1.3 trillion. Yes, some of that had to do with the whooping cough, but yes. And their estimation is it's not really a revenue problem, it's a spending problem, which makes total sense. Okay, but when I'm reading this book, the sad thing is, and this is kind of predictable, what the public does when they face inflation. public does is demand, like unions demand for better wages, which is understandable. Prices keep soaring higher. If there's any social benefits, they go to the streets to protest to get better social benefits. Again, understandable. And politicians are all too willing to give it to them, which just keeps that ball rolling, that inflation ball, unfortunately. So they say it's on autopilot. The real reason why it's on autopilot is we used to have about a third of the pie going to automatic spending or mandatory spending. Now it's about 3/4 of the pie going to mandatory spending, which is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Take up a lion's share of that. So that means Congress doesn't vote on that. Every year, Congress doesn't vote on that. And that's taking up a bigger and bigger piece of the pie to the point where potentially in the next decade, it's going to take all of tax receipts, all of them. And then that leaves the military, all the other social programs, any discretionary spending, that's going to be deficit spending. You can see how this gets out of control really, really fast. And so as we take on more debt, I've said this before, obviously, even if the interest rate stays stagnant, our interest payment goes up. It's not really cosmic stuff. So in 1965, mandatory spending accounted for 34%, and now we're at 71% of tax receipts. How do we get out of this? That's what, your average citizen, part of this channel, is designed to tell people to wake up. Because in this book, When Money Dies, no one knew what was going on. They often blamed the symptoms, not the cause, like people speculating. They thought it was the reason the currency was dying is because people were speculating on it, not because the government was printing it out of a bazooka. And I hope that through channels like mine and others, that people realize that's the problem. The problem is the government in these false incentives that they put into the system. So as much as the spotlight is on discretionary spending, you always hear Rand Paul talk about this, which I'm all about, because we can cut certain discretionary spending, $2.4 million to the National Science Foundation to promote dinosaur enthusiasm. You can go down the list. $11.3 million to help Vietnamese people stop burning trash. Tons of things that we spend money on that you would say as a taxpayer, I don't think so. And the only reason we do it is because we have a printer. And Fiat, I heard this on a podcast the other day, Fiat does a good job of delaying consequences, right? Pushing it off to the next guy. So oftentimes in the real world, if you make a stupid decision, you get immediate feedback, like that was a bad idea. And the way we're able to take on debt, like in 2008, you don't get this immediate feedback. You get this false sugar high. You think everything's great. And unfortunately, it just delays the consequence and makes it better, or makes it bigger. And so Fiat gives you this false sense of, hey, we're fixing the problem, when in reality, you're just delaying it and making it bigger. And that's what allows zombie companies to exist, companies that can't even exist without this cheap debt, yada, yada, yada. So meaningful changes in the mandatory spending are required to meaningfully adjust Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. My question to you is, do you think voters will vote for that? I don't understand why, because Republicans have come out and said, hey, we want to reform this. Certain senators have said, you know what we want to do? We want to make Social Security a discretionary spending, so it's voted on every year so we can reevaluate. But it goes up with inflation, right? So it's becoming this bigger part of the pie, and Congress doesn't even vote on it. And it's this behemoth that no one wants to touch because you're not going to get voted in. What I don't understand is how come a politician can't just level with people? Educate the American public. They don't know this stuff. You cannot have your cake and eat it too. We'll keep Social Security for what it is. We'll give you the money. That'll destroy your purchasing power. That's really the two options. We have to lower what you get on Social Security, which, don't get me started on that. Shouldn't have started it in the first place. I think a lot of people, if they would have saved that money that the government taxed them, they'd be way better off than where they are today. with being reliant on Social Security. So they were made this promise, yada, yada, yada. But why can't a politician just say, hey, we got these two choices. We can keep Social Security the way it is, and that will cause us to print money, which will lower the value of the actual check you get, or we can cut it. So this is going to affect your grandkids, your great-grandkids, yada, yada, yada. No politician will do that. I don't get it. They just say, we want to cut it, and they don't explain why. Blows my mind. So the truth is, these programs increasingly operate not as savings account insurance plans, but rather as schemes to redistribute money, aka Ponzi schemes. That's what they are at this point. Social Security has a trust fund that's slowly diminishing. By 2035, that trust fund is supposed to be nixed, aka out of money. And that means that you're going to have to cut benefits by 20% automatically. Medicaid, I believe, is supposed to run out of money. That trust fund is supposed to run out of money in 6 years. So it's just reality. And you can face reality now or delay it and make it worse. Without action, however, time is coming for Social Security and Medicare in a big way. Social Security trust funds are projected, like I said, to run out in 2035, which triggers an automatic 20% cut. Medicare trust fund is projected to vanish in just 6 years, with less clarity on how shrinking resources will be apportioned. I recommend you guys read When Money Dies. I'm enjoying it. It really opens up my eyes to how there's this like underlying, which is what I feel. They talk about this like rampant speculation. And immediately what came to my mind was those JPEGs that people were bidding millions of dollars for last year. And it's this like subsurface, people don't even realize why they're doing it, but people are speculating to keep up with inflation. Sometimes they know, sometimes they don't, but that's what they're doing. And that's what they did in Weimar Germany. I hope we can be wiser and learn from history. But the other thing history tells you, unfortunately, is that people don't learn from history. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'll link this article in there too. We'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.